The ticking of the wall clock blended with the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, creating a tense symphony in the delivery room. Grace Lockwood, her forehead drenched in sweat, clung tightly to Adam's hand as if letting go would cause her to drift away in the whirlwind of pain tearing through her body. The white light from the overhead lamps reflected in her tearful eyes, filled with both hope and fear. Beside her, Adam's large hand enveloped hers. But his eyes, though trying to appear calm, betrayed his unease. "You're doing great, Grace," Adam said softly, his voice hoarse, almost drowned out by the flurry of activity from the nurses. He wasn't a man of many words, but in this moment, his simple reassurance was a lifeline for Grace. Grace nodded, saying nothing, focusing on her breathing as instructed by the doctor. This wasn't just childbirth. It was the moment they had been waiting for through 9 long months of prenatal visits, ultrasound photos, and late-night conversations about their family's future. A future they thought would be full of light. The sudden waves of pain were like crashing tides, pulling Grace further from the shores of consciousness. Yet even amidst the agony, she felt the immense power of life stirring within her. She and Adam had prepared for this, or so she thought. "Get ready. It's almost here," the doctor's voice rang out, a commanding anchor amidst the chaos. And then the moment came. A fragile, resolute cry pierced the air, breaking through the tension. That cry, full of life, made everything else fade away. Grace gasped for breath, tears streaming down her face before she even realized it. Adam leaned closer, his eyes brimming with a mixture of joy and worry. They had waited for this sound, but they hadn't anticipated how overwhelming it would feel. Then came a second cry. Adam turned to the doctor, his face a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Moments later, a third cry echoed, stronger than the first two. The delivery room erupted in joy. "Triplets," a nurse exclaimed, her voice trembling with happiness. Grace could only lie there, breathing heavily, but a weak smile formed on her lips. She felt her heart grow 3 sizes larger in an instant. 3 babies, 3 tiny lives swaddled tightly in blankets, were brought one by one to their parents. Grace, despite her utter exhaustion, felt the warmth of each small body in her arms. Her heart overflowed with an indescribable love. "We did it, Adam," she whispered, her eyes closing as tears streamed down her cheeks. But when she looked up to meet her husband's eyes, the shared joy she expected wasn't there. Adam's face, the face that had been her refuge during the hardest times, was now frozen, stiff as stone. His eyes did not hold pride or emotion, but instead a mix of shock and something else. He stepped back, then took another step. "Adam?" Grace called, her voice shaky. But he didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the 3 babies, their dark brown skin contrasting starkly with her pale complexion and his. And then, as though he couldn't bear it a second longer, he turned and hurried out of the room. Grace stared after him, her mouth opening to call him back, but no words came out. The door closed behind Adam, leaving her in a room filled with the cries of newborns and a heart that had just shattered. The hospital room was eerily quiet, with only the soft, steady breathing of the 3 babies filling the silence. Grace lay on the cold white bed, her body weak and aching from labor. The faint light streaming through the window cast pale shadows, as if time itself had paused. The 3 infants lay close to her, their tiny, peaceful faces a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. She turned her head toward the door. Adam still hadn't returned. He couldn't have truly walked away. He just couldn't. Throughout the past months, he had been there, ready to care for her and support her through every tough moment. He had been the first to cry tears of joy when they learned they were expecting triplets. And now, in this defining moment, when their 3 children had arrived, he had disappeared, taking with him the trust she had placed in him. And now, more than ever, she needed him, needed his shoulder to lean on and his words of comfort. Grace sighed, trying to convince herself that he just needed time to process everything. "He'll come back," she whispered, willing herself to fend off the creeping tide of negative thoughts. But the worry gnawed at her, growing heavier with every passing minute. The door suddenly creaked open. Grace's head shot up, her heart pounding in her chest. But as her eyes landed on Adam, the initial relief she felt quickly gave way to an unshakable fear. He entered, not with the gentle eyes she once knew, but with a cold, chilling expression. In his hands were 2 large bags, heavy and crumpled, as though hastily packed. "These are your things," Adam said curtly, his voice void of emotion, before tossing the bags onto the floor with a thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room, cutting through the air like a blade. "What are you doing?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. She sat up, the lingering pain of childbirth searing through her body, but her unease compelled her to face him. "You lied to me," Adam shouted, his eyes blazing with an anger she had never seen before. "You think I wouldn't notice? You think I'm an idiot? These are not my children." His words were like a dagger plunging into Grace's heart. She stared at him, speechless, unable to comprehend how he could think such a thing. "Adam, what are you saying? They are our children." Grace tried to stay calm, her voice shaking with desperation. "Our children?" He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cutting. "Look at them, Grace, their skin, their eyes. Don't tell me I wouldn't notice the difference." He pointed at the 3 sleeping babies. "You betrayed me, and now you expect me to believe they're mine? No, you're wrong," Grace screamed, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't betray you. I would never do that." But Adam wasn't listening. He shook his head, as though trying to block out her words. "Don't pretend to be innocent. Go back to the man you cheated on me with, and let him raise these children." Grace was stunned. She wanted to fight back, to scream that he was wrong, but her throat felt constricted, and no words would come. She could only watch as Adam turned and walked out, leaving her alone in her unbearable pain. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound marking the end of everything she had believed in. The days that followed were a blur for Grace. She called Adam over and over, but the phone only rang in vain. The messages she sent went unanswered. She didn't know what to do or what she had done to deserve this cold abandonment. Then a notification from the bank arrived, like a lightning bolt striking through an already stormy sky. Their joint account had been emptied. Every penny Grace had saved through years of hard work was gone. She didn't need to think twice to know who was responsible. Adam. He hadn't just left her, hadn't just accused her of infidelity without reason. He had taken the last of her financial security. He had run away, leaving her with 3 newborns and a shattered heart. That night, sitting beside the crib of her children, Grace cried until she had no strength left. She looked at the tiny, innocent faces sleeping peacefully and wondered how she could protect them when she herself was drowning in despair. But amidst the darkness of the room, the faint glow from the nightlight fell on their faces, reminding her that she couldn't afford to fall apart. She had been abandoned, but she wouldn't let her life be defined by pain. Grace clenched her fists, vowing that even though Adam had taken everything, he wouldn't take her hope or her children's future. In her darkest moments, when Grace felt she was sinking into the abyss of despair, a name flashed in her mind: Mother. Eleanor, her unwavering rock throughout her life. Grace didn't know if her mother could change her circumstances, but she needed someone by her side, someone who wouldn't turn away like Adam had. With trembling hands, Grace picked up the phone and dialed her mother's number. When Eleanor answered, her familiar warm voice came through. "Grace, my love, what's wrong?" Immediately the tears returned, and Grace poured out everything in a torrent of sobs and words. Eleanor didn't ask questions or place blame. She simply said, "I'll be there right away." An hour later, Eleanor arrived at the hospital. In her later years, Eleanor no longer moved with the same agility as before, but the determination in her eyes brought Grace a sense of calm. She walked into the room and saw her daughter, frail, with dark circles under her eyes, and the 3 babies in the crib. Without a word, she enveloped Grace in a tight embrace, as though shielding her from all the storms of the world. "Don't worry, my love. I'm here now." After the warm embrace, Eleanor quickly got to work. She gathered Grace's belongings, meticulously checking every drawer in the hospital room to ensure nothing was left behind. All you need to do is rest. Don't worry about anything else. I'll take care of it." Watching her mother move with purpose, her calloused yet skillful hands working swiftly, Grace felt a surge of warmth in her heart. Sometimes, all it took was one person's unwavering belief to lift her out of the depths of despair. The first days after leaving the hospital were a true test. Eleanor's small, peaceful home was now filled with the cries of newborns and the hurried footsteps of their caretakers. Grace, despite her best efforts, felt utterly drained. Each time she tried to nurse her babies, the pain in her chest and her exhaustion brought her to tears. Some nights, she sat staring blankly at her 3 children, unsure how to keep going. But Eleanor was always there. She held the babies when they cried, prepared bottles when Grace couldn't muster the strength, and made sure she ate every meal, whether she wanted to or not. "You need to stay strong," Eleanor said firmly but lovingly. "Not just for yourself, but for these 3 little ones." Her mother's words felt like a command. Grace couldn't afford to fall apart. Even when her body and spirit felt like they might collapse, she forced herself to keep going. Each time she looked into her children's innocent eyes, she reminded herself, "They need me." As time passed, the physical struggles eased, but the pain in Grace's heart didn't. Each time she saw a family on the street, a father holding his child, a mother smiling, her chest tightened. She couldn't help but ask herself, "Why did this happen to me? Why did Adam betray me so cruelly?" She couldn't make sense of it, but instead of letting those questions consume her, Grace turned her pain into determination. She didn't want to cry anymore. She didn't want to live in uncertainty. She needed to know the truth. Why had Adam left? Why had he so easily believed she had betrayed him when she herself couldn't understand why her children looked different? She began replaying every small detail, every moment from the past. She remembered Adam's strange expression when the doctor first announced they were having triplets. She recalled his interrupted phone calls, the late nights he claimed to be working overtime. Something had happened long before the day she gave birth. Something she had missed. Then, an idea struck Grace. "It's not my fault. Maybe it was never my fault," she whispered to herself. Grace began to realize that Adam's anger at the children might have been an excuse, a convenient way to leave. She had to uncover the truth, not only to find closure for herself, but to protect her children from the shadows of the past. Eleanor, noticing her daughter deep in thought, came over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "What are you thinking, Grace?" Grace looked at her mother, her eyes alight with a determination Eleanor hadn't seen before. "I won't let the truth stay buried. I'll find out everything, no matter what it takes." Eleanor nodded. "I'll be with you every step of the way." With Eleanor's support, Grace began her journey to uncover the truth. It wasn't just a fight to reclaim her dignity, but a promise to herself. She wouldn't let Adam's betrayal dictate her life any longer. 5 years passed in a blur. Grace Lockwood was no longer the broken woman left behind by Adam. She had rebuilt her life from scratch, becoming a legal assistant at a small law firm. The job was demanding, but it gave her a sense of security and control she once thought she'd lost forever. She and Eleanor lived in a quiet neighborhood where Milo, Noah, and Ella, now 5 years old, thrived in a home filled with love and care. Their laughter filled the house, brightening every shadow of Grace's past pain. But the memories of Adam were never completely gone. They only seemed to fade into the background. Or so it seemed. One evening, darkness began to creep back into Grace's life. She returned home after a long day at work, the clack of her high heels echoing on the porch steps as she approached the front door. The light spilling from the living room window reassured her. Her mother, Eleanor, was surely playing with the children. But as she bent down to retrieve her keys from her bag, she noticed something unusual lying on the doorstep. It was an envelope. Grace frowned, carefully picking it up. There was no sender's name, no postage mark, just a plain white sheet folded neatly inside. She unfolded it to reveal jagged black ink scrawling a chilling message. "You think you can hide forever?" Her heart pounded. She glanced around, searching the quiet night for any sign of movement, but saw nothing except the empty street. The air suddenly felt suffocating. A familiar sensation, a blend of fear and unease she had buried over the past 5 years, returned like a nightmare resurfacing. The letters didn't stop. At first they came sporadically, slipped under the door or left in the mailbox. Their contents were vague but haunting. "You'll pay the price. What you're hiding will never stay buried." Grace felt as though she were being watched but couldn't determine by whom. She tried to hide her fear from Eleanor and the children, but on sleepless nights, she would sit on her bed, her eyes fixed on the bedroom door, waiting for some ominous sound to break the silence. She couldn't take it anymore. One morning, after dropping the kids off at school, Grace decided to go to the police. She recounted the details of the letters, her voice trembling yet resolute, but their response left her disheartened. "There's no concrete evidence. It's difficult to investigate without leads." Things only got worse. One afternoon, Grace came home earlier than usual. Eleanor had taken the children to the park, leaving the house empty. As Grace stepped inside, a chill ran down her spine. Something felt off. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, the feeling of unease growing stronger. When she opened the door, she froze. On her pillow was another letter. Someone had been inside. Grace rushed to the window, yanking the curtains open. No one was outside. Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. The message inside was short but suffocating. "Did you think changing the locks would stop me? I always know where you are." Her sense of security was completely shattered. Grace broke down in tears, not from fear, but from anger. She was furious at whoever had invaded her life, tearing down everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. One name echoed in her mind: Adam. She had no proof, but her gut told her he was behind it all. After 5 years of silence, he had returned, not to apologize, but to torment her further. She called the police again, her voice steadier than before. They came to inspect the house, but no signs of forced entry were found. No cameras had captured any suspicious activity. "We'll increase patrols in the area," they assured her. But Grace knew it wouldn't be enough to put her mind at ease. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Unable to sit idly by, Grace approached a colleague at the law firm where she worked, someone who had helped her through a tough case in the past. She shared her story in detail and asked for assistance in investigating Adam. "I need to know where he is. I need to prove he's the one threatening me," Grace said, her eyes burning with unwavering determination. Her colleague looked at her, his expression serious. "All right, but this might take time." Grace nodded. Time wasn't what she feared. What terrified her was the idea of doing nothing, allowing the ghosts of her past to destroy the life she had painstakingly rebuilt. As she left the office that day, the sunlight outside was blinding, but it did little to thaw the chill in her heart. "Adam," she thought, "wherever you are, I will find you, and this time, you won't escape." Grace's long nights became sleepless. She jolted awake at every small sound in the quiet house. Even after replacing all the locks and installing a security system around the property, the invisible net of unease continued to tighten around her. The letters kept coming, no longer vague but now disturbingly specific. One mentioned the school schedules of Milo, Noah, and Ella. Another described in detail the dress Grace had worn to work the day before. Her privacy, the boundaries she had worked so hard to rebuild, had been shattered, laid bare in what felt like a sick game. Grace no longer felt fear. The panic had transformed into rage. She was determined to find the person behind this and put an end to their cruel game. Standing in her small kitchen, Grace held the latest letter in her hand. The dim light cast her shadow on the wall behind her. The words on the page, "I told you, you'll never escape me," echoed in her mind like a challenge. But this time, it didn't make her tremble in fear. Her chest rose and fell, not with panic but with a fire of anger burning hotter than anything she had ever felt. Grace was no longer the broken woman of 5 years ago. She wasn't the abandoned wife left to face her pain and despair alone. Over the years, she had learned to rise from the ashes Adam had left behind, rebuilding her life with hands and a heart full of determination. Now, she wasn't just Grace, a mother, a resilient woman, and someone willing to fight for everything that was hers. Grace recalled those early days after Adam had left. She had cried herself to sleep every night, her heart shattered into pieces. When her 3 babies cried out of hunger, she had cried alongside them, unsure of what to do. When her bank account had been emptied, she had felt as though she had lost everything. But as the days turned into weeks, that pain began to morph into strength. Being the mother of 3 newborns had left her no time for weakness. Eleanor, her mother, had taught her that in the hardest moments, a mother could not afford to fall. Grace had taken those words to heart, gradually finding herself again and redefining her life without Adam. Those sleepless nights spent tending to her children or worrying about the future had been met with a resilience even she hadn't known she possessed. Looking at the words on the letter, Grace knew she was facing Adam, the man who had abandoned her and was now trying to control her from the shadows. But she was no longer the Grace he had left behind. 5 years ago, she might have cried, trembled, and begged for help. Now, she read those words with a cold smile. If Adam wanted to challenge her, he would face a woman transformed, a woman who had learned to turn pain into power and fear into determination. Grace sat at the table, flipping through the documents Daniel had brought her. The story of Adam's mother, Lillian Lockwood, began to take shape in her mind. The secret of her affair with a black man, the truth about Adam's mixed heritage. Grace couldn't help but wonder, how had Adam felt when he learned this? Had he been shocked, hurt, or had he chosen to bury the truth, as his mother had, to preserve his perfect image? Grace sighed. She understood now that Adam hadn't had the courage to face the truth. He had chosen the easiest path, blaming her. He had made her the scapegoat for all his anger and shame. But this time, Grace wouldn't let him. Grace stood up, clutching the paper tightly in her hand. "You were wrong to think I'm still the weak woman you once knew," she whispered, her eyes blazing with determination. "I am no longer the Grace you could abandon and control. I will protect my children, protect the life I've built, and you will never destroy it again." She thought of Milo, Noah, and Ella, her 3 children who had given her a reason to keep going when everything seemed to fall apart. They weren't just her children, they were her strength, her reason to fight. For them, she told herself, I won't back down. Grace picked up her phone and called Daniel. "We have to act now. I can't wait any longer. Adam needs to be exposed." Daniel was silent for a moment before replying in a firm voice, "I understand. I'll do everything I can to help you." As the call ended, Grace looked around her kitchen. The photos of her children taped to the refrigerator, the little signs of a happy family she had built with her own hands, reminded her of what she was fighting for. No matter what Adam tried to do, she wouldn't let him touch what she had worked so hard to create. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, the light from her lamp illuminating her determined face. With every document and every file, she carefully laid out her plan to confront Adam. She knew this fight wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about ensuring her children's safety and proving that her past wouldn't dictate her future. As the first rays of dawn streamed through the window, Grace stood and walked to the mirror. She looked at the woman staring back at her, a woman who had endured pain and rediscovered herself. She smiled, a small but meaningful smile. "You chose the wrong person to play with, Adam," she said to his shadow in her mind. "This time, I'm the one in control, and I will win." The warm glow of lights filled Grace's small home, accompanied by the joyous laughter of Milo, Noah, and Ella. Today was their 10th birthday, and Grace had planned everything to make it unforgettable. Colorful balloons floated against the ceiling, a cake sat at the center of the table, and their friends played happily around them. Grace stood in the corner, watching the scene before her. For the first time in months, she felt truly at peace. Her children's smiles were like rays of light, banishing any lingering shadows from her heart. But the feeling didn't last. The front door suddenly burst open. a cold draft swept in, snuffing out part of the glowing candles on the cake. Everyone turned, and time seemed to freeze. Adam stood in the doorway. His appearance startled everyone. His clothes were wrinkled, his face gaunt, and his hollow eyes filled with anguish. He looked like a ghost from the past, appearing uninvited on a day meant for joy and celebration. Grace's breath caught, her chest tightening as she saw him. Her heart no longer ached as it had the day he left. But his presence was like an old wound being reopened. Why was he here? And why today? Adam walked slowly into the room, his steps heavy as if carrying the weight of the world. He stopped in front of Grace, then suddenly dropped to his knees. The murmurs in the room faded into silence. No one dared to say a word. Grace, his voice was shaky, choked with emotion. I don't even know where to start, but I'm begging you, please, forgive me. Grace stood still, her cold eyes fixed on the man she had once called her husband. He bowed his head low, his trembling hands gripping his knees. In that moment, Grace realized that Adam, the man who had abandoned her without hesitation, was now nothing but a shadow of himself. But that didn't soften her heart. She couldn't forget the years of pain he had caused. I don't know what to do, Adam continued, his voice breaking as though he were on the verge of collapse. My mother, she told me the truth. I know everything now. Milo, Noah, and Ella, they're my children. I was wrong. It's all my fault. Grace didn't respond, only stared at him, her eyes as cold as ice. I've known the truth for a long time, Adam confessed, his voice growing quieter. But instead of apologizing, instead of making things right, I used it as an excuse to blame you. I was scared, Grace. I didn't have the courage to admit that I was the cause of everything. Scared? Grace finally spoke, her voice sharp with bitterness. You were so scared that you left me in the hospital with 3 newborns? You were so scared that you emptied our bank account and ran away? You were so scared that you sent threatening letters, broke into my home just to frighten me? That's how you deal with fear, Adam? Adam bowed his head lower, his shoulders shaking. I know I was wrong. I know I deserve to be punished. But I can't live like this anymore, Grace. I've lost everything. The woman I left you for, she only used me. When the money I took from you ran out, she abandoned me. Grace let out a bitter laugh, cold and devoid of pity. What do you expect me to feel, Adam? Sympathy? Do you think I'll forget everything you did just because you're standing here now, pathetic and full of regret? Grace. Adam looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, but I want to make things right. I want to be a father to our children. Please give me one chance. Just one. Grace stepped closer to Adam, her eyes burning with fury. You want to be their father? She said, her voice deliberate and cutting. Where were you when I worked myself to exhaustion to provide for them? Where were you when they were sick, when they cried in the middle of the night, and I didn't know what to do? Where were you when I fought to keep this family alive? You are not their father, Adam. You are just a ghost, a shadow they never needed. Her words were like daggers, each one carving deeper into Adam's fragile pride. He hung his head, unable to respond. You didn't come here for them, Grace continued, her voice cold as ice. You came here for yourself, because you've lost everything. But I'm not the woman you can control or exploit anymore. I don't need you, and neither do my children. Grace turned, her eyes landing on her 3 children standing in the corner, their innocent eyes watching their father. She smiled at them, a smile filled with tenderness and strength, before picking up the phone and dialing the police. You've done enough, Adam, she said without looking back. It's time for you to face the consequences. When the police arrived, Adam didn't resist. He lowered his head and walked away, leaving behind a home filled with light and laughter. Grace stood there, feeling a massive weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. I don't need forgiveness, Grace whispered to herself. I only need peace. The room fell silent as the sound of the police car faded into the distance, breaking the tension in the air. Grace stood still, her eyes following Adam's defeated figure as he was escorted away. His face no longer held any trace of arrogance. Instead, it bore the unmistakable marks of regret, not from love or compassion, but from the realization that he had lost everything: his family, his freedom, and ultimately himself. But Grace felt no pity. She stood firm, her hand still gripping the phone, a symbol of her choice to act rather than live in fear. The door closed behind Adam, and with that sound, a dark chapter of her life finally came to an end. Grace took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. A sense of relief spread through her body, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she no longer felt trapped by fear or anger. She no longer had to glance over her shoulder when stepping outside or worry about the arrival of another threatening letter. But just as the relief washed over her, a wave of powerful emotions followed. Grace reflected on everything she had endured: the despair after Adam abandoned her, the sleepless nights with crying infants, and the countless times she told herself she had to be strong, because she had no other choice. She remembered Adam's face as he confessed everything, begging for forgiveness. For a fleeting moment she wondered, if things had been different, could we have had a different ending? But she quickly shook her head, dismissing the thought. Grace knew that forgiveness could not erase the pain he had caused, nor could it undo the choices he had made. Grace turned to look at her children. Milo, Noah, and Ella stood close to Eleanor, their eyes wide with curiosity and worry. They were too young to understand the whole story, but Grace knew that one day they would need to know the truth. She walked over, knelt in front of them, and held their small hands in hers. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I will always love you, and I will always protect you no matter what happens." Milo, the eldest, tilted his head and asked, "Mom, who was that man?" Grace closed her eyes briefly. She had known this question would come, but her heart still clenched when she heard it. She placed a hand on Milo's shoulder, her gaze steady and sincere. "That's a story I'll tell you when you're older. But the most important thing you need to know right now is that Grandma and I are here, and I won't let anyone hurt you." Ella, with her bright, curious eyes, held her mother's hand tightly and asked softly, "Mommy, are you okay?" A tear slid down Grace's cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was one of relief and gratitude. She nodded and pulled all three children into her arms. "I'm okay, my love. I'm okay." That night, when everything had quieted down, Grace sat alone in the living room, gazing out the window at the star-filled sky. She thought about all she had been through, about the long journey she had taken to reach this point. She didn't need Adam. She had never needed him. She realized that her true strength had come not from relying on someone else, but from standing on her own, from protecting what mattered most: her children, her family, and her peace of mind. She closed her eyes, savoring the serenity of her home. There were no more stealthy footsteps, no more threatening letters. Only the steady breathing of her children in their bedrooms and the strong, unwavering beat of her heart, reminding her that she had triumphed, not just over Adam, but over the fear within herself. Grace didn't think she would forgive Adam, but she also realized she didn't need to. Forgiveness, she understood, wasn't about absolving someone else's mistakes. It was about freeing herself from the weight of hatred and resentment. And tonight, as she looked up at the starry sky, she felt truly free. For the first time in years, Grace felt like she was standing on solid ground, a place where she could rebuild her life without the shadows of the past haunting her. She smiled, stood up, turned off the lights, and stepped into the bedroom where her children were sound asleep. Whatever lay ahead might be difficult, but she knew she was ready and stronger than ever. The story of Grace Lockwood is one of pain, resilience, and triumph. It's not just a story about betrayal and hurt. It's a tale of how a woman rebuilt herself and reclaimed her life after enduring trials that seemed insurmountable. Grace is a living testament to the strength of a woman facing adversity. Betrayed and abandoned by her husband in the moment she needed him most, Grace lost not only her partner, but also had to shoulder the responsibility of raising 3 newborns alone, both financially and emotionally. Yet, instead of giving up, she stood tall, rebuilt her life from nothing, and created a safe and loving home for her family. Her determination became a guiding light for her and her children, giving her the strength to overcome every obstacle. The story also highlights that no secret stays hidden forever. Adam's lies and manipulations, from using their children's skin color as an excuse to blame Grace, to the truth about his own mixed heritage, were eventually uncovered. Though painful, the truth was necessary for healing and justice. Grace faced the truth head-on and used it to protect herself and her children, proving that truth is the strongest foundation for any battle. At the heart of this story is Grace's love and sacrifice for her children. Every decision she made, every action she took, stemmed from her desire to protect and bring happiness to Milo, Noah, and Ella. That love drove her to rise after Adam abandoned her, to confront her fears from the threatening letters, and ultimately to stand face to face with him to demand justice. Her love is not just her driving force, it is a symbol of the unyielding strength of motherhood, a strength that can overcome any challenge. Grace's final act of calling the police to have Adam arrested was not just a legal step, but a declaration of her self-worth. She refused to let her past control her any longer. By bringing Adam to justice, Grace showed that she would never again be destroyed by his selfish and cruel actions. It was not just a personal liberation, but a lesson for her children. No one has the right to harm you, and you can always stand up for yourself. The story concludes not with Grace forgiving Adam, but with her triumph over the darkness in her life. It's a victory for resilience, truth, and love. Grace reclaimed her life, found freedom and peace, and above all, did what Adam never could: face the truth and turned it into strength. She emerged from her darkest days into the light of peace and freedom, becoming a symbol of the courage and determination of a modern woman. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey with Grace on Echoes of Empathy. If this story has touched your heart, sparked compassion, or inspired you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help us reach our milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support not only motivates us, but also enables us to continue sharing meaningful stories about kindness and connection. See you in the next story.